6 words had shattered 5 days of careful distance. And now Naomi Ashworth Kim sat frozen in the back of a speeding car beside the husband she'd left a week earlier, a man who had just voluntarily given up an empire to try to become someone worthy of her forgiveness, only to discover that stepping away from power doesn't mean power stops hunting you. Unknown, found her already. Naomi stared at the message, her hands trembling. Dae-sung, who found who? His jaw was tight, his phone already pressed to his ear, barely acknowledging her question as Hae-won's voice came through sharp and urgent on the other end. "Talk to me," Dae-sung said, his voice carrying none of the stripped-down vulnerability from the calf 10 minutes earlier, something colder now. Something Naomi hadn't seen from him in the entire 6 years of their marriage. "Sir, we lost visual on Patrice Ashworth's residence for approximately 4 minutes during the extraction," Hae-won said, her voice tight with barely controlled tension. "My team arrived to move her to safety and found the house empty. No signs of struggle, no forced entry. She's simply gone, sir." Naomi's stomach dropped through the floor of the car. "Gone? What does gone mean, Dae-sung? Where is my aunt?" Dae-sung met her eyes, and for the first time since she'd known him through betrayals, through reconciliations, through 6 years of a marriage built on love and devastation in equal measure, she saw something in his face that frightened her more than anything else had all week. Genuine, total fear. "I don't know yet," he said quietly. "But Naomi, I promise you, we are going to find her, and I am going to make sure whoever did this understands exactly what a mistake it was." The car sped through the city streets, and Naomi gripped the door handle. The careful, deliberate distance she'd built over 5 days collapsing entirely under the weight of a fear that had nothing to do with betrayal, and everything to do with the one person who had raised her, loved her, and taken her in without hesitation the moment she'd needed somewhere safe to go. This was never supposed to touch her. She has nothing to do with any of this. Her phone buzzed again. The same unknown number. "Unknown, tell your husband the eastern routes were never actually the point. He'll understand soon enough." Naomi looked up at Dae-sung, her voice shaking. "What does that mean?" "Dae-sung, what haven't you told me?" Dae-sung's face went pale as he read the message over her shoulder, a realization dawning in his eyes that made Naomi's blood run cold before he'd even said a single word. "It means," he said slowly, "that this was never actually about business at all. Welcome back, everyone, if you watched part 1. Thank you for demanding this next chapter. I read every single comment asking what happens next, and I promise this one delivers. If you're new here and haven't seen part 1 yet, go check it out first. This one won't make sense without it. Now, drop your city or country below like always. I genuinely love seeing this. And I need to tell you honestly, what Dae-sung realizes in the next few minutes changes absolutely everything you think you understood about why this happened to Naomi's family. Stay with me till the end on this one. Let's find out where Patrice is. 20 minutes earlier, Aunt Patrice had been in her kitchen, humming softly to herself while preparing dinner, when a knock came at the door, polite, unhurried, nothing like the urgent, forceful entry she might have expected from danger. She opened it to find a well-dressed young woman standing on her porch, holding what appeared to be a delivery box, flanked by 2 men in plain, unremarkable clothing who kept their distance, deliberately non-threatening. "Mrs. Ashworth?" the young woman said politely. "I have a delivery for you. I just need a signature." Patrice had lived long enough and raised Naomi through enough hard lessons to recognize when something felt wrong beneath a surface that looked perfectly ordinary. But by the time her instincts caught up to the situation, one of the men had already stepped forward, his polite expression never wavering, a small device pressed briefly against her arm. The last thing she remembered clearly was the young woman's calm, apologetic voice. "I'm sorry about this, ma'am. Truly, this isn't personal." Patrice woke sometime later. She had no way of knowing exactly how much time had passed in a dim, unfamiliar room. Wrists secured loosely but firmly to a chair, her head throbbing from whatever had been in that injection. A man sat across from her, calm, composed, dressed in an expensive dark suit that made him look entirely out of place in the sparse concrete room. "Mrs. Ashworth," Baek Chul-min said pleasantly, as though greeting an old acquaintance rather than a woman he'd just had drugged and abducted. I apologize for the theatrics. I promise you, this will be brief and largely painless, provided your nephew-in-law understands the situation correctly. Where am I? Patrice demanded, her voice steadier than she felt, decades of raising a headstrong niece having taught her exactly how to project calm in the face of real fear. What do you want? A conversation, Chol-min said simply, with Kwon Dae-sung. Through you, since he's proven remarkably difficult to reach through more conventional means over the past week. He studied her carefully. You raised Naomi, I understand, after her mother passed. Patrice's jaw tightened. Don't talk about my niece. I have no interest in harming your niece, Chulman said. Or you, for that matter, provided this conversation goes the way I need it to. My interest, Mrs. Ashworth, is considerably more specific than either of you. Back in the speeding car, Dae-sung's face had gone rigid with a controlled fury Naomi had never once witnessed directed at anything other than a business dispute, and never with this particular focused intensity. Tell me what he means, Naomi demanded again. Dae-sung, the eastern routes were never the point. What is the actual point? Dae-sung was quiet for a long moment, his phone still gripped tightly in his hand, before he finally answered, his voice low and grim. 15 years ago, he said slowly, before I built the shipping empire, before any of this I was a much younger, much more reckless man working under my father's organization. Chalman and I were rivals even then, competing for the same territory, the same resources. There was an incident. He paused, choosing his next words with visible difficulty. His younger brother was killed during a conflict between our organizations. I wasn't directly responsible, it was one of my father's lieutenants who made the decision, but Chalman has never fully accepted that distinction. He spent 15 years believing I orchestrated it personally, and waiting for an opportunity to make me understand exactly what that kind of loss feels like. Naomi stared at him, horror dawning slowly. You're telling me this isn't about business at all. This is 15 years of personal revenge, and my aunt just got caught in the middle of it. Yes, Dae-sung said quietly. And I should have told you this the moment I realized Cholmin was involved in threatening Keisha. He stopped himself. Who's Keisha? Naomi asked sharply. Dae-sung closed his eyes briefly. Another situation. Unrelated to you directly, but connected to Cholmin. I'll explain everything, Naomi. I promise you. But right now we need to focus on getting your aunt back safely. Naomi's phone buzzed again. This time, an image accompanied the message. Patrice, visibly frightened but physically unharmed, sitting in what looked like a sparse concrete room, a folded newspaper displaying today's date held up beside her face as grim proof of life. Unknown, she's safe for now. Dae-sung knows what I actually want. Tell him the clock starts when he reads this. Naomi's hands shook as she showed Dae-sung the image, watching his expression harden into something she'd genuinely never seen from him before. Not the desperate vulnerability of the past week. Not the controlled business negotiator she'd witnessed handling countless disputes over 6 years of marriage. But something colder, more dangerous. The version of him that had built and maintained control over an empire through means she'd spent 6 years deliberately not asking too many questions about. What does he actually want? Naomi asked, her voice barely steady. Me, Dae-sung said simply. In exchange for her. He's had 15 years to plan exactly how he wanted this conversation to happen, Naomi. And he's finally found the perfect leverage to make sure I show up exactly where and how he wants me. Then we call the police, Naomi said immediately. Right now, Dae-sung, we call actual authorities. We don't just the police can't reach where he's likely holding her in time, Dae-sung said grimly. And even if they could. Cholmin has spent 15 years building protections against exactly that kind of interference. I know this world, Naomi. I know exactly how these situations actually get resolved, and it's rarely through official channels. So what are you saying? Naomi asked, though some deep, terrified part of her already suspected the answer. Dae-sung looked at her, and for the first time since she'd left him a week earlier, she saw the full, complicated weight of exactly who he actually was, Not just a man capable of betrayal and genuine remorse in equal measure, but a man who had spent his entire adult life navigating exactly this kind of violence, and who now had to decide how far he was willing to go to protect the family of the woman he'd spent 6 years failing to fully deserve. "I'm saying," Dae-sung said quietly, "that I'm going to give him exactly what he wants. And I need you to trust me, Naomi, more than you've ever trusted me before, that I know how to survive what happens next." Hae-won argued against it for nearly 20 minutes once they reached the safe house, pacing the length of the reinforced living room while Dae-sung sat perfectly still, listening with the particular patience of a man who had already made his decision and was simply allowing her the courtesy of objecting. "Sir," walking into Cholmin's territory alone, unarmed, exactly as he specified, "this isn't negotiation, this is surrender," Hae-won said sharply. 15 years of restraint, and now, the 1 week you've decided to give up your own protection entirely, he chooses to strike. That timing isn't coincidence, sir. He's been waiting for exactly this moment of vulnerability. "I know," Dae-sung said calmly. "Then why? Because Patrice Ashworth has nothing to do with 15 years of history between Cholmin and me," Dae-sung said, his voice hardening. "She's an innocent woman who raised the person I love most in this world. And she is in danger entirely because of choices I made long before I ever met Naomi. I am not going to negotiate her safety through half measures, Hae-won. I'm going to give Chulmin exactly what he wants, and then I'm going to make sure he understands precisely how badly he's miscalculated." Naomi, sitting in the corner of the room, finally spoke, her voice tight with barely controlled fear. "You keep saying that he's miscalculated. What does that actually mean, Dae-sung? What are you planning?" Dae-sung turned to her, something resolute settling into his expression. "It means I'm not walking in there as helpless as he assumes. Hae-won, show her the contingency." Hae-won hesitated only a moment before pulling up a detailed schematic on her tablet, sliding it toward Naomi. Chulmin specified a warehouse in Incheon's industrial district for the exchange. "We've had contingency plans for facilities in that entire region for years, sir's standard security protocol. I can have a tactical team positioned within the perimeter within the hour, invisible to Chulmin's people, ready to move the moment your aunt is secured." "And Dae-sung?" Naomi asked. "What happens to him during this?" "I go in exactly as specified," Dae-sung said. "Alone, unarmed, precisely following Chulmin's terms. He needs to believe he's won completely, Naomi, or he won't actually bring your aunt to the exchange point at all. But the moment she's secured, moved to safety, sir has a secondary agreement in place," Hae-won interjected. "Something Cholmin doesn't know about yet." "What agreement?" Naomi asked. Dae-sung was quiet for a moment before answering. 3 of Cholmin's senior lieutenants reached out to my organization independently 2 days ago. Apparently my public withdrawal from illegitimate operations created exactly the kind of instability within his own organization that Hae-won's earlier intelligence suggested it might. They're not comfortable with how far he's taken this personal vendetta, Naomi, kidnapping an elderly civilian, threatening someone entirely unconnected to any actual business, dispute several of his own people, see this as reckless, potentially catastrophic for the entire organization's stability. So they're willing to move against him, Naomi said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. If given the right incentive and the right moment, Dae-sung confirmed, which is exactly what walking into that warehouse, appearing to comply completely with his demands, is going to provide. Naomi absorbed this, fear and something more complicated, grudging, unwilling respect warring in her chest. "This is insane, Dae-sung. You're staking my aunt's life, and yours, on the loyalty of men who work for the person threatening us." "I understand the risk," Dae-sung said quietly. "But Naomi, I've spent 15 years learning exactly how organizations like Cholmin's actually function. Loyalty in that world isn't about affection. It's about calculated self-interest. His lieutenants aren't helping me because they suddenly care about your aunt's safety. They're helping me because Cholmin's obsession with a 15-year-old grudge has become a liability to their own survival. and removing that liability serves their interests far more than protecting him does. Naomi looked at him for a long moment, seeing, with sudden and uncomfortable clarity, exactly how thoroughly this man understood a world she'd spent 6 years deliberately keeping at arm's length. "I need you to promise me something," she said finally. "Anything. If this goes wrong, if Chulmin doesn't honor whatever terms he set, if his lieutenants don't actually move when you need them to, I need to know you have an actual exit plan, not just contingencies for my aunt. For you too." Something in Dae-sung's expression softened, genuine surprise crossing his features. "You're worried about me." "Of course I'm worried about you," Naomi snapped, months of careful, protective distance cracking under the weight of genuine fear. "Dae-sung, I left you a week ago because I couldn't survive another betrayal. That doesn't mean I want you dead in some warehouse in Incheon." Dae-sung studied her for a long moment, something raw and unguarded passing between them, despite everything that remained unresolved. "I have an exit plan," he said quietly. "Haewon's team will be positioned to extract me the moment your aunt is secure, regardless of what happens with Chulmin's lieutenants. I don't intend to die in that warehouse, Naomi. I intend to walk out of it. And I intend to spend whatever time you're willing to give me afterward, actually earning back even a fraction of what I've cost you over these 6 years." His phone buzzed a message from the unknown number, the deadline apparently approaching. Unknown, 2 hours. Warehouse District, Pier 7, Incheon, come alone, or she doesn't leave that room. Dae-sung stood, straightening his jacket with the particular calm precision Naomi remembered from countless business crises over the years, except this time. She understood with growing dread, the crisis wasn't a shipping contract or a rival negotiation. It was her aunt's life, and his own, both balanced on a plan built from 15 years of buried history she was only now beginning to fully understand. "I need to go," Dae-sung said quietly, moving toward the door. Naomi caught his arm before he could leave, the same gesture he'd used to try to stop her a week earlier, in their bedroom, when she'd walked away with her suitcase. "Come back," she said, her voice fierce despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "Whatever happens in that warehouse, Dae-sung, you come back. We still have unfinished business, you and I. And I refuse to let Baek Chul-min be the reason I never get the chance to actually decide how it ends." Dae-sung looked down at her hand on his arm, something fierce and grateful and terrified all moving behind his dark eyes. "I intend to give you that chance," he said quietly, "whatever it costs me." He left, and Naomi stood alone in the safe house with Haewon, watching the black car disappear down the street, carrying the man she'd left a week ago into danger he'd inherited long before either of them had ever met, praying, for the first time in longer than she could remember, that whatever complicated, broken, genuine love still existed between them would somehow be enough to bring him home. The warehouse at Pier 7 was exactly as unremarkable as Dae-sung expected: corrugated metal walls, the smell of salt and rust, cargo containers stacked in careless rows that provided exactly the kind of visual cover Chulmin's people would use for their own positioning. He walked in alone, hands visible, exactly as instructed. His footsteps echoing across the concrete floor toward a single pool of light in the center of the warehouse, where Chulmin stood beside a chair holding Patrice, her wrists still bound but her expression fierce, unbroken, despite everything. Dae-sung. Chulmin's voice carried easily across the space, pleasant in a way that made the hair on the back of Dae-sung's neck rise. Punctual, as always. "I appreciate that about you, even now." "Let her go," Dae-sung said, stopping a careful distance away, exactly as their positioning strategy had calculated. "You have me. She has nothing to do with any of this." "I disagree," Chulmin said calmly. "She has everything to do with this, Dae-sung, because for 15 years I've watched you build an empire, marry brilliantly, live a life my brother never got the chance to have, and you never once, in all that time, showed me you understood exactly what that loss actually felt like." He gestured toward Patrice. "Now you do. Now you understand what it means to watch someone you love placed in danger you can't fully control." "I never ordered your brother's death," Dae-sung said. his voice steady despite the fury building beneath it. You know that, Chulmin. My father's lieutenant made that decision without my knowledge or approval. You benefited from it regardless, Chulmin said sharply. You inherited territory that opened up because of his death. You built your empire, in part, on the foundation his absence created. I don't need you to have pulled the trigger yourself, Dae-sung, to hold you responsible for everything that followed. Patrice, watching this exchange with fierce, careful attention, finally spoke, her voice cutting through the tension with unexpected clarity. Young man, she said, addressing Chulmin directly, I don't know the full history between you two, and frankly, at my age, I've buried enough people to understand grief doesn't follow anyone's rules. But holding an innocent woman hostage because a man wronged you 15 years ago doesn't honor your brother's memory. It just makes you exactly the kind of man who took him from you in the first place. Chulmin's composed expression flickered, something raw and unguarded crossing his face for just a moment before he recovered. You don't understand, he said quietly. I understand loss, Patrice said firmly. I raised my niece alone after her mother died. I understand exactly what it costs to keep moving forward when the world takes something irreplaceable from you. But I never once let that grief turn me into someone who'd terrify an innocent stranger to feel better about my own pain. The warehouse fell silent, Chulmin visibly wrestling with something beneath his careful composure, and Dae-sung watched, tension coiled through his entire body, waiting for the moment to act. Release her, Dae-sung said again, quieter now. I'm here, exactly as you asked. Whatever you intend to do to me, Chulmin, let her leave first. Chulmin studied him for a long moment, something calculating moving behind his eyes. You'd trade your own safety for hers so readily. Yes, Dae-sung said simply. Even after everything, Chulmin said slowly. Even knowing I could simply keep both of you here, that your compliance changes nothing about my actual leverage. I know exactly what you could do, Dae-sung said. But I also know your lieutenants aren't comfortable with how far you've taken this, Chulmin. Kidnapping an elderly civilian, someone entirely disconnected from our actual business history, that's not the kind of leadership that maintains loyalty in our world. Whatever satisfaction you're hoping to find in this, I don't think it's going to feel the way you're expecting. Something flickered across Chulmin's face, the first genuine crack of uncertainty since Dae-sung had walked into the warehouse. You're bluffing, Chulmin said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Check your phone, Dae-sung said quietly. I suspect you'll find several missed calls from people you trusted to remain loyal throughout this. Chulmin hesitated, then pulled his phone from his jacket, his expression shifting rapidly as he registered whatever notifications were waiting there, multiple missed calls, urgent messages, the particular electronic evidence of an organization's confidence in its leader beginning to visibly fracture. What have you done? Chulmin said slowly, looking up at Dae-sung with dawning, furious understanding. Nothing, Dae-sung said honestly. I didn't need to do anything, Chulmin. Your own people watched you kidnap an innocent grandmother over a 15-year-old grudge, and they decided, entirely on their own, that following a leader capable of that kind of recklessness wasn't a risk worth taking anymore. The warehouse door at the far end burst open suddenly, 3 men in dark suits entering with the particular urgent authority of people who'd made a decision, and were now committed to seeing it through Chulmin's own senior lieutenants, exactly as Dae-sung's earlier intelligence had promised. Boss, the lead lieutenant said, his voice carrying across the warehouse with careful, deliberate formality. We need to talk. Now about the direction this organization is heading. Chulmin's face contorted with fury and dawning, humiliating realization as he understood, in real time, exactly how thoroughly his own carefully planned revenge had backfired. This isn't finished, he said, backing toward the shadows at the warehouse's edge, his composure finally, fully shattering. It is, actually, Dae-sung said quietly, moving swiftly toward Patrice, working urgently at the ties binding her wrists. For you, Chulmin, this is finished. Whatever happens next between you and your own organization, that's no longer my concern. But this hurting people who have nothing to do with our history, this ends today. Patrice's wrists came free, and Dae-sung helped her to her feet, her legs unsteady but her spirit, remarkably, still fierce despite everything. "Are you hurt?" Dae-sung asked urgently. "I'm fine," Patrice said, though her voice shook slightly. "Frightened, exhausted, and I will be having very strong words with my niece about exactly what kind of family she's married into. But fine." Chulmin's lieutenants surrounded him now, their expressions carrying the particular grim finality of men who'd already made their decision. And as Dae-sung guided Patrice toward the warehouse exit, he heard, behind him, the first raised voices of an organization's internal reckoning beginning in earnest. Hae-won's tactical team met them at the entrance. Security personnel moving swiftly to secure Patrice, medical support already waiting nearby despite her insistence that she needed nothing more than a strong cup of tea and a long nap. Dae-sung's phone buzzed as they reached the cars. "Naomi, is she safe?" Naomi's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "Dae-sung, tell me she's safe." "She's safe," Dae-sung said, relief flooding through his own exhausted body as he watched Patrice being helped into a car, already fussing at the security personnel about proper tea preparation despite everything she'd just survived. "We're coming home, Naomi. Both of us." There was a long shaking exhale on the other end of the line. "Thank God." Dae-sung, thank God. He ended the call and looked back at the warehouse one final time, the sounds of Chulmin's organizational collapse still audible even from this distance, and felt, for the first time in 15 years, the genuine, complicated relief of a debt finally, violently settled. But as he climbed into the car beside Patrice, he had no way of knowing that this confrontation, however it resolved Chulmin's threat, had also permanently, irreversibly changed something between himself and Naomi, something that neither grand gestures nor voluntary sacrifice of power could fully repair, and something that would determine, in the days that followed, whether the man who'd walked into that warehouse willing to trade his own safety for her family's had actually done enough to earn back what he'd broken across 5 long years of betrayal. Patrice recovered at the safe house over the following 2 days, her fierce resilience gradually reasserting itself despite the lingering shock of the ordeal. Fussing over everyone within reach with the particular restorative energy of a woman determined not to let fear have the final word. Naomi stayed close throughout, though the careful, complicated distance between herself and Dae-sung remained gratitude and relief tangled inextricably. With 5 days of hard-won resolve, she wasn't yet ready to fully abandon. On the 3rd evening, once Patrice had finally been settled comfortably, insisting she was well enough to return home the following morning with appropriate security in place, Naomi found Dae-sung alone on the safe house's small back porch, staring out at nothing in particular. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. He turned, something cautious and hopeful crossing his exhausted features. "Of course." She sat beside him, close but not touching, the careful physical distance she'd maintained since leaving still present even now. "I need to understand something," she said finally. "The past week stepping down from your operations, walking into that warehouse willing to trade your own safety for my aunt's. All of it. I need to know if this is genuinely who you are. Or if this is simply what crisis reveals about you temporarily, the same way grand gestures revealed something temporarily 4 times before." Dae-sung considered the question seriously, weighing his answer with visible care. "I don't know if I can prove that to you with words, Naomi. I understand that. 4 previous times, I've made promises, and each time, I believed them completely in the moment I made them. I don't expect you to simply trust my intentions this time, regardless of how genuine they feel to me." "Then what do I do with that?" Naomi asked, frustration and exhaustion coloring her voice. "Dae-sung, I want to believe this is different. God help me, watching you walk into that warehouse. I have never been more terrified or more certain of how deeply I still love you, despite everything. But loving you has never actually been the problem, has it? The problem has always been whether loving you is enough to keep you faithful, and I don't know how to trust that answer anymore, regardless of how many empires you're willing to give up." Dae-sung was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the weight of her words. "I think," he said slowly, that you're right not to simply trust my intentions. I think the only thing that will actually mean anything, going forward, is sustained action over time, not a single dramatic gesture, but months, years, of consistent, boring, unremarkable faithfulness. The kind that doesn't make for dramatic television, Naomi. Just showing up, every day, being the man I claim I want to be, without needing a crisis to force it out of me. And, if I'm not ready to give you that time, Naomi asked quietly, if I decide, after everything, that I need to move forward with the divorce regardless of what you're willing to promise, then I'll respect that, Dae-sung said, though something in his voice cracked slightly beneath the words. I won't fight you on it, Naomi. I won't use resources, or pressure, or manipulation to change your mind. I've spent this past week trying to become someone capable of actually respecting your autonomy, even when respecting it costs me everything I want most. If you decide this marriage is over, I'll accept that decision, and I'll spend whatever years I have left trying to become the kind of man who deserves the chance you gave me, even if I never get to prove it to you directly. Naomi felt tears gathering, the weight of 6 years, 4 betrayals, countless reconciliations, and now this final, terrifying test pressing down on her with exhausting finality. I don't know what I want, she admitted quietly. I know I love you. I know watching you walk into that warehouse terrified me more than any betrayal ever has, because for the first time, I understood I might actually lose you permanently, and some part of me realized how unbearable that thought was. She wiped at her eyes, frustrated with her own uncertainty. But loving you and trusting you have never been the same thing, Dae-sung, and right now, I genuinely don't know if I have any trust left to give you, regardless of how much love remains. Dae-sung reached for her hand, hesitant, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. Then let me earn it back, he said quietly. Not through grand gestures, not through crisis. Just time, Naomi. Give me time to prove this is different through nothing more dramatic than simply, consistently, being faithful, every single day, for as long as it takes you to believe it. Naomi looked at their joined hands, 6 years of complicated history condensed into this single uncertain moment. I need space, she said finally. Real space, Dae-sung. Not divorce, not yet, but not moving back home either. I need time to figure out whether I'm capable of trusting you again, separate from the adrenaline of everything that just happened with my aunt. Take whatever time you need, Dae-sung said. I'll be here whenever you're ready to talk again. I won't push, I won't pressure, I won't show up uninvited. I'll simply wait, and I'll spend that time proving, through nothing but consistent action, that this time is genuinely different. Naomi nodded slowly, something settling in her chest that wasn't quite resolution, but felt, for the first time in a very difficult week, like the beginning of an actual path forward, uncertain, unresolved, but honest in a way their marriage hadn't been in longer than she cared to admit. 6 months later, Naomi sat in her own apartment, modest, entirely her own, purchased with her own resources despite Dae-sung's careful, respectful offers to help that she'd firmly declined, reviewing a case file for her law firm when her phone buzzed with a text. Dae-sung, I know it's not our usual day. I just wanted you to know I made the anniversary donation to Aunt Petrus's church, the one she mentioned during dinner last month. No expectation of response, just wanted you to know. Naomi looked at the message for a long moment. 6 months of careful, deliberate rebuilding, weekly dinners, honest conversations, consistent, unremarkable faithfulness exactly as he'd promised. No grand gestures. Just steady, patient presence settling into something that felt, cautiously, like it might actually be different this time. She wasn't ready to move back home. She wasn't certain she ever would be. But for the first time in 6 months, sitting alone in her own apartment with his simple, unprompted text glowing on her screen, Naomi allowed herself to wonder, just slightly, whether 6 years of betrayal and heartbreak might eventually give way to something genuinely, sustainably different. She didn't respond immediately. But she didn't delete the message either. If this 2-part story took you through every emotion tonight, Drop a comment telling me whether you think Naomi should give him another chance, and let me know where you're watching from. Subscribe for more stories about the complicated, difficult work of rebuilding trust after betrayal. See you in the next one.